All right, again, so the email that I sent you yesterday had two parts to it. It should have had both a folder that said Bootstrap in class exercise and one that said Forms in class exercise. So I want to go over the form stuff first, all right? And we'll see what time it is then. If we need to, we'll take a break, and then we'll go over what's actually in the chapter. So to start with, I created this, which doesn't look very good. At least in my opinion, it doesn't look very good. All right? It is a form, but the idea is what we'll eventually get to by the end when we look at the last one is that same form will now look like this, which at least in my opinion looks a lot nicer. All right, so what I want to do is I want to discuss the way that all three of these particular forms look. Now, the first one has no CSS in it whatsoever. All right, so what I did was I grabbed an old file that I had, but I wanted to mention a few of the things that are in here. All right. I'm hoping by now the majority of the stuff that you see in gray there makes sense to you. We've already talked about that first meta tag. That first meta tag says that the character set we're using is UTF-8, which means we're using what's referred to as the Unicode character set. That's the first thing. All right. The second one, you know, I guess that for whatever reason, and that's why a lot of people get on my case for ripping on them all the time, but Microsoft has to have their hands in every place. It says here, the equivalent compatible content equals IE Edge. It's a Microsoft thing. Do you have to put that in there? No. But there's a chance that if you are using older versions of IE, that line will help. All right. This one, hopefully, because you just took the test, the stuff that's in there makes a little bit of sense to you. This is trying to take the page. It's not totally, don't get me wrong. I didn't put any responsiveness in here. But what this is that viewport tag, which again says width equal device width. So use as much of the width of whatever I'm using to look at this as you possibly can. And when you bring it up, have it be up at 100%. Now, my hope is that all that stuff through basically right here at least, all that stuff makes sense to you. We don't have to talk about that anymore. All right? Then next, the stuff that you see right here, again, not really necessary, but to keep in sync, so to speak, with older browsers, especially older versions of Internet Explorer. What in English, what that's saying, let's make it real simple. You're telling the older versions of the browser, if you don't understand something that's in here, ignore it. All right? All right. So, you all know what H1 tags are. So what's new in here, unfortunately, because it's most of the file, is all of this stuff. So everything from line 19 through line 150. So about 120 lines. So what I want to do is fairly quickly walk you through this. I thought it would make more sense to walk through this with a real example as opposed to what the author shows in the book where she gives bits and pieces. All right? Every time you create a form, the form must have a form tag in it. Now that shouldn't be a real surprise to you. The stuff that I put in here, by and large, most of the stuff that you see in gray there, most of it is not necessary. But I want to explain what it is and when it is necessary. So again, the entire tag, there's the beginning form tag right there, lines 19, 20, 21, and 22. I could have put that all on one line, but it would have been hard for you to read because it might have scrolled off the screen. That's again why I put it on one line. And the ending form tag, again, is down near the very bottom, down here. So let's talk about all the stuff that's in between there. The first thing that you see there says action equals, and it has a pound sign. What that means is when you click the submit button, don't go anywhere. All right? The action means typically what you want to do is you'll typically put in an address in here like maybe verify.php or verify.aspx or verify.jsp, something like that. We're not putting anything in there. And that action, what that says is it's going to send it out to a server someplace. We're not sending it out to a server because we're not working with a server yet. So we're saying just stay where you are. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. The next thing that's in here is method equal post. Now I'm going to tell you a few things, and we haven't talked about this yet, so it might not make a lot of sense. What you can put in there is either method equal post, like we have, or method equal get. All right? Those are the two things. There are a lot of really good articles out on the internet that if you type in what's the difference between a post and a get, they'll show them to you. But I want to tell you about them in just very, very limited scope here. If you say post, like we did right there, a couple big things are going to happen. All right? First of all, typically when you post something, it means that you're changing something. And when you think about it, if I'm going to come in here and even as ugly as this is, if I want to put in my first name, my last name, my address, my city, my state, my cell phone, etc. We'll get into this a little later, but notice they're check boxes. These are radio buttons. Okay, and only one of these can be on, and some stuff in here. All right. I typically will want to put stuff in there. All right. It's not inconceivable that this could be a shopping cart. And one of the things that it could ask me to put in would be something along the lines of credit card number. Okay? It's possible that it could ask me for that. So the reason I'm telling you that is when this says post, okay? When this says post, what happens is once I put in all of that good information, all right, whatever it is, and I click submit, okay, just submit it. All right, just well, big deal. Well, if I come in here and I change this from post to get, all right, which is what I just did right there, and I run this again. And I'm just putting garbage in here, as you can see. Now when I click submit, you may or may not have noticed, but if you look up here, when you do a get, what happens is it takes all the information that you've just put in there and it puts it into what's called the query string. The query string is everything that you see in here after the question mark. All right? Because what this is right here, that's the name of our form. But after the question mark, if you use what's called a get, it shows all of that information that's up there. So if I had information that wasn't classified, maybe it just was asking for a name or something like that, I could use a get. All right? But if I'm sending information that I want to send to the server, then I use a post. All right? There's more to it than that, just so you know. If I choose a get, okay, then what I can do is I can bookmark that page. You know, I think you all know how to use bookmarks or electronic bookmarks. But if I use a post, you can't bookmark the page. All right? The other thing that's important about it is when you use a get, you're limited to about 4,000 bytes of information. So that's about 4,000 characters. That might sound like a lot. All right? But on the same time, if you're asking somebody, if you notice what I put in here, this says comments. What if somebody really wants to type a whole lot of stuff? It could be more than 4,000 characters that they put in there. It's possible. Now, on the other hand, when you use a post, typically rather than 4K, 4,000 bytes of information, it's about 2 meg. It's about 2 million bytes of information. And I just want to show you last thing, and I mentioned this to you, but if I could type in here, what's the difference between a post and a get? All right, there's an article that I've shown people for a long time, and I'm sure I won't find it. It's not it, because it's really ugly. That's how I know. That's not it either. And I know it's here, but I'd have to go and search for it. But you'll notice it comes up with 63 million hits. You can even just go out to W3 Schools, and it'll tell you what you do with a get and what you do with a post. Most of the stuff that's in here is stuff I just showed you. Just so you know, most of that's in there. All right. So I mentioned to you that when we do a get, it does this. But when we do a post, it does that. It doesn't show it. Well, it still has to send that information, right? I mean, it still has to send information, but it hides it in what's called an HTTP header. Okay? So the post is considered to be more secure than a get. That doesn't mean that people can't find information that you put into a post. They can, but it's harder. If you don't know, they've actually done studies, and typically when people try to do bad things on the internet, all right, typically what will happen is a lot of people try to break into different accounts and do this and do that, not because they're going to do anything harmful. They just want to see if they can do it or not. Now, that's not everybody. There's probably a good 1 to 10% that are in there trying to steal credit card numbers and to do this and to do that. But the reason I'm telling you that is by putting in post as opposed to get, you're adding an extra layer of security. You're trying to make it harder for the person who's trying to break in. All right? All right. So I went over the action, which is, again, typically going to be a server-side file. So you'll send that out so you can handle it using a language like a server-side language like PHP or ASP.NET or Java server pages. All right, we just mentioned the method, okay? And that method, again, is going to be get or post. The last two things that are in here say ID and they say name. And you'll notice they have the exact same name for both. All right? What you're going to notice, not now, but in a few weeks, when we finish this part of the class and we go into the next part of the class, which will be JavaScript, is you will be using a command in JavaScript, and that particular command is called get element by ID. Everybody see that? And just be cognizant of the fact it is case sensitive. It has to be like that. Most people who screw it up make the D and ID, they make it capitalized because you're just used to saying ID with a capital I and a capital D. So why am I telling you this? Because that get element by ID right there, that's the same ID that you have right here. So if I wanted to be able to programmatically get to my form, I could use get element by ID. Then inside of here, I would have to put in form example. Now again, that may not make a whole lot of sense to you right now, and it's fine if it doesn't. But I want to get you into the idea of anything that you might want to manipulate programmatically. You want to add an ID and you want to add a name. The ID is for JavaScript. So what about the other one, the name? The name is for the server-side language that might use it. So it's for PHP or ASP.NET or Java server pages or whatever. And almost always, not quite, and you'll see an exception in a minute, but almost always, these will be the same name. Does all that make sense to everybody? All right. The next thing that's in here is it says field set, which starts there and it ends down here. All right. What that field set does is that's what draws this line or this box around the whole thing. That's a field set. Not to be funny, but it's a set of fields. All right. And you'll notice that right after the field set, the next thing that's in there right after the field set is what's called a legend. And the legend here says name and address info. Well, what is that? That's this, name and address info. So when you choose a legend, it's a title or a name for a field set. I could have made this and not used any field sets whatsoever. But a lot of times you group things together like this. And you notice how ugly it is because by default, field sets stretch and use 100% of the screen. All right, and that's one of the things I cut it down when when we went into later parts of this. All right. So then we went over these two. Then we've got this, and the book talks about a few things here, but I'm trying to teach you the best way to do things right away. All right, I can appreciate when a book says, "Oh, I'm going to show you how to do this," and then they show it to you and they go, "But just so you know, no one ever uses this anymore." And I can appreciate that, but there could be some of it out there. Okay. But what this means is right here where it says label 4 equals. This means this label right here is associated with that field right there. Notice how it says 4 equals F name, and that's the name here, here, and here. So what that's doing is it's providing accessibility. The other thing that it does, and it's not a big thing, but notice if I click here, you see how it puts me right into the box? It wasn't blue before. So if I go and click on city, well, I don't know why it put me into address, but it did. But hopefully, at least, you get the idea. All right? Okay, so this says it's a label. Labels typically are what you use to provide headings. You probably have all filled out some kind of a form before online where it says like first name and then there's a box. That box is the text box. Where it says first name, that's the label. You'll notice that for virtually everything that I have in here, there's a label, there's a label, there's a label, there's a label, label. Label, 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 label. All right? You don't ever have to use labels, but typically they provide, you know, a little context, a little clarity to what it is you're trying to do. So the next thing that's in there, it says input type equal text. What that means, and you'll notice that not all of them, but the next 4 in here, first name, last name, address, and city, all have type equal text. That means give me a text box. That's what that is. And a text box is something that you can type in. It either provides you with a way to input something or to type something in, or it provides output for you. So it shows you the results of what you typed in. So you'll notice when we look at this, we've got a label and a text box for the first name, a label and a text box for the last name, a label and a text box for the address, a label and a text box for the city. Okay? Then we get down to here. And I will tell you, this looks like a heck of a lot to type. Okay? But if you go online and you type in select list for United States, all this code, I grabbed it from online. So if you have to ever create a form with this in it, I'd suggest not typing it in yourself unless you have nothing better to do. All right? But what this does, and it should make sense to you, is that's the drop-down list. Starts with Alabama. Now they've even started to incorporate District of Columbia in there. Okay? If I wanted to use countries, and you probably have seen this, maybe you've done this when you fill out a form, where you have to choose United States type of thing. All right? Now, what if I wanted to do this, and you'll notice that it says Alabama right here because it's in alphabetic order. You may have noticed this before where instead of that, at the top, they say, please select a state. All right? And the reason that sometimes it says in there, please select a state instead of Alabama, because people forget to select the state. Okay? So what happens is they choose Alabama because that's the default one. All right? But if I wanted to, and I'm going off the top of my head here, but I think I'm right. Let's say that what we wanted in here was we wanted Missouri. So I'm going to type in here, I think this is right. We're going to find out right away. I'm going to type in selected. All right, so under Missouri right there, I typed in the word selected. All right, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to try to run it again. Do you notice how the state changed? Now, if this was going to be some kind of a registration form for Rankin, and Rankin probably gets somewhere, I think it's between 80 and 90% of their students come in here, and they come in from Missouri. All right, there are people in this room who are exceptions to that. You've told me about that. I get that. They also recruit, I guess in the Perryville campus that they're going to set up next year, they're going to be recruiting in Arkansas, and I don't know where else. But I know they've also done recruitment in Illinois. But the point is, if, let's say, 90% of the students who come here have a Missouri address or are from Missouri, you might want to set up a default like this. All right, then rather than having a default to Alabama, which is what it did earlier because that's the first one in the list, it defaults to Missouri. All right, you don't have to do that. but you saw how we did it by just typing in the word selected. You can only have one selected. You can't have it default to two different things. And if I did another one after this, so if I put in for Oklahoma and had selected on both, since Oklahoma comes after Missouri, that's the one that would be selected. All right? So what does this do? This is what's called a select list. It's also referred to as a drop-down list. All right? So it says here, we've got a label for it. It says state. All right? And here we're going to select. And we're saying ID equals state and name equals state. Then what you have in a select list are a bunch of different options. All right? And notice what I have in here. I've got value equal and then Alabama. Okay, this may or may not confuse you, but it's really important. We don't talk about databases in this program until I think it's, well, I'm going to try to sneak it in next semester, even though it's not part of the thing for next semester. I want you to see it. But the idea is, do I have to put that into a database? Do I have to put in Alabama? I'd rather put in, if I have something that's called state, I want to make it just 2 characters long because there's a state code. So now I don't have to type in Mississippi. I just type in MS, type of an idea. All right? So this value that's right here, that's typically that value that you see under value equals. That's what's going to be stored usually in a database, is the value that comes after it. This thing that's right here that you see in black, Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, etc., that's what's actually going to show in here. Does that make sense? All right. Again, this is all stuff that's brought up in the chapter, but I'm trying to run through it first. All right. So then we end our field list, or our field set rather, and we've got another one. I made another one. And that second one, if you noticed, that's got contact info and it's got cell phone. And I don't have to go over that anymore because that's just a text box. And it's got email address, and I don't have to go over that one anymore because it's a text box. So I'm taking for granted, because no one asked questions, that you understand everything that's in here and the first 2 things that are in here. All right? And if you say, well, I understand them, but I've never done anything with them, well, then you probably haven't read the chapter, because it's explained fairly well by the author in the chapter. All right? So then we get down to here. And so we did the cell phone, we did the email address, and now we've got best way to contact. All right? Before we go over this, and we will, does anybody know what that means? What's that? It's a space. That's what's called an HTML character entity. It forces there to be a space there. So if I wanted there to be 10 spaces between something, remember the way that the web works, if I hit the space bar 10 times, it takes all those 10 and it collapses them into one space. But if I want to force there to be 10 spaces, I could do ampersand NBSP, which stands for non-breaking space. That's what it stands for, with a semicolon after it. So I'm forcing there to be 3 blank spaces here. All right, just to show you that it could be done that way. Then notice we've got checkboxes here and here. And there also. So there's a label that says best way to contact. Then we have 3 checkboxes. With a checkbox, and believe it or not, you all know what this means. Have you ever gone out and seen checkboxes on a form or something that says bold, and then there's a checkbox, italics, and then there's a checkbox, and underline, and there's a checkbox? You know what I'm talking about? You can choose none of them, one of them, any 2, or all 3. All right? And that's the way that a checkbox works. So if I wanted to be able to be contacted by email and by cell phone and by Facebook, I could choose all 3. And you'll notice right there when I bring this up, I can, if I want to, check all 3. It's totally fine to do that. All right? The next thing that's shown in here are what are called radio buttons. And I believe at least everybody in here is too young to remember this, but back when I was younger, okay, in a car, you literally had push-button radio. Maybe you've seen a classic car that has that kind of thing, where you pre-programmed the stations in, and you pushed a button in, but only one button could be pushed in at a time. That's how radio buttons work. So for instance, the most classic thing for radio buttons is gender. All right? And I realize we live in a politically correct world, etc., but at least historically, you put male and female in there. All right? And you choose one or you choose the other. Well, what I've done in here is I've got full-time and part-time. And you'll notice that when I click on full-time, it's fine. Notice what happens when I click on part-time. The checkbox or the circle in full-time goes away. Because with radio buttons, they're designed for choices that are what are called mutually exclusive. So only one can be chosen at a time. All right? I could choose 0, 1, 2, or 3 of ways to contact, but only one status, full-time or part-time. All right? And again, that's the way it's set up. Now, I mentioned, if you look in here, notice name equal work status, name equal work status. It's got the same name. And it has to, because what that's doing is it's telling the system these two radio buttons are part of a group. So handle them as though they're one thing. And you need that. So if I had in here, let's just suppose, like I said, I realize we're getting into a more gender different type of world. All right. So let's say that I had their male, female. A friend of mine told me, literally, he lives in Madison, Wisconsin. This is not a joke. He filled out a form in Madison, and under gender, there were 13 possibilities. Literally. I don't know what they were. I didn't ask him. But the point is, we're kind of getting to that point today, where there, quite often, you have a lot of different choices that someone can make. All right. What if I wanted to force you up here to be contacted in only one way? I could have made these radio buttons and had email, cell phone, and Facebook. Then you would have had to have checked one of them. Does that make sense? Now, you may or may not have noticed this, but when I start with both the check boxes and the radio buttons, do you notice how neither one of them are checked? Okay. What if I wanted to force them? Then the word that I use in there, so let's say I want to force, by default, I want it to be email here. Okay. So now I put in the word checked. And I put in the same word, so let's say that under work status, I wanted it to default to full time. So again, I'm going to put in here checked. I just saved. I'm going to go back to here, and you say it's not there. Well, when I refresh, hopefully you can see that that one is now checked. I'm trying to figure out why the email, if I screwed up or what. I know it's not selected. It is checked. So let's see if I did something wrong. Cell phone, email, checked. That should be correct. I'll put selected, but I'm 99.9% sure that's wrong. But we'll try it anyway. All right, it's still not highlighted. I'm not sure why, because it should be checked. But hopefully you notice at least with this one. Okay? Sometimes at least you'll put in the word checked like that, and even though it's not working. But you'll put that in because you want to make sure that when the user starts, something is highlighted. All right. Had this been gender, I might have defaulted it to male, or I might have defaulted it to female, depending on the situation. All right. Again, if I'm doing this form and it's for, let's say it's for a school where we know that 90% of the school is female. Maybe it's been a female school for years, but now they're starting to take in males. I might want to default it to something. All right? All right. Then we've got this thing down here. It's called a text area, and that literally is what it is. Okay? So here's the beginning of my text area. There's the end of my text area. And I'm telling it, saying it's called comments. Rows are 25 and columns are 4. All right? Now I'm going to change this so you can tell the difference. I'm going to set rows to 100, and I'm going to set columns to 25, and I'm going to save. All right, now I'm going to come back to here. You all see what it looks like. Watch when I refresh. Is it pretty obvious what rows and columns does? All right, columns makes it wider, rows makes it taller. Now, a couple last things, and then we're going to go on to the next part of this. You may or may not have noticed this. This input tag is one of those. It does not have a closing tag. There is no closing tag when it says input. And there's other stuff you can put in there other than text. You're going to see that in just a couple minutes. The text area does have a closing tag. You have to use it. All right? The easiest way to screw up a form is to miss a tag. Either put something in that's not needed or don't put something in that is needed. We all do it. So that's the first one. Okay? Then with the second one here, so I'm just going to close all this. I'm going to finish this and then we'll take a break, come back, and we'll actually go through what's in the chapter. So let me close all this stuff that's in here so there's no confusion. In this example that I showed you, this first example, there was no CSS in it. There's just that file. Well, now look, in the second example under adding CSS, I added a file, and let's take a quick look at what's in there. I said I want my text color to be navy. I want my font size to be 1.5 times what it usually is. I want a left margin of 30, so I want it pushed off from the left-hand side. That's everything. Required, okay, I'm going to have a couple fields in there that are required, so they're going to be red and bold, okay? I'm going to have a main heading that's got a margin in it, and I did that so that it would line up. Same thing with a subheading. This field set, remember that thing that I told you, that the box around it, how it took 100% of the screen? I said only take 35%, so a little more than a third. All right. All my labels, I want them to display inline block with a width of 150 pixels, to be the text to be right aligned, and the margin bottom to be 10 pixels. All right. Finally, the submit button, I want that to be centered. And if I went through that too fast, again, the easiest way to figure out what's happening here is to look at that file. So when we look at this, here's the field set, which was 100%. It's now 35%. All right. Here, I pushed everything over 30 pixels, so it's not pushed against the side like it was before. Here, I put a margin or padding. I don't remember what it was, and I think it was a margin here and here, so they lined up a little better. All right. Here, I created that red class, so it would be red, and you can see I have 3 fields that are required. First name, last name, and email address. All right? Now, the good news about this, if you say, wow, this lecture's taken really long, is if you take a look in here at the file, it looks exactly the same as it did before, except we added fields with the red asterisk are required. So we added that, and then I actually added the asterisk for the first name, for the last name, and for the email address. Other than that, it's exactly the same as what we looked at before. Exactly. There's no difference. All right. The only problem with this, as it currently stands, okay, what I'm telling the user is those fields are required. Okay? But let's say that I leave them off, and I'm going to put in a bunch of stuff here just so you see it. In fact, we'll put in different stuff. Now, what's going to happen here is it's just going to flash over the screen and all this stuff will be gone. But what I want you to understand is this. I didn't get any error messages. Even though those fields were required, I didn't get any error message. Because I didn't put anything in there to force that. You said, well, you put that in there. Yeah. That's like me telling my daughter, my 20-year-old daughter, I expect you home by 10. Yeah, that's going to happen. I can tell her that, but that doesn't mean she's going to do it. So for the last example, the last one that's in here, and again, we'll finish this up and then we'll take a break. Now we've got new HTML5 elements. This, I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think, that's not changed at all. That's the exact same. The CSS is exactly the same. But what's changed is now, when I come in here, notice now when I press submit, I get an error message. It says this is a required field. Plus, if you look, all the fields that are required are now in red. So let's say I put something in there. Whoa. Come on. All right. So I come in there and I put Jeff, and you notice how the red went away, and I put Scott, and you notice how that went away. All right. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in hello. All right. So I put hello in there for the email address, and I click submit. Now I get I should get another error. It's not showing it. It's in here, but it's too small for you to see. And of course, it's not letting me change the screen size. But you get an error in here that says you must use the right format. All right. So how did we do that? There's not much to show you. All this is the same. Every bit in here is exactly identical. But now we put the word required in there. It's a fairly new word. Okay? And you say, well, yeah, you put required here and you put it here. No, this just said make that asterisk red and bold. This says that the field itself is required. It's inside of the input tag. So if you put the word required in there, you have to put it in. You have to put in some kind of value there. So that's required. This is required. And the email address is required. All right. The other thing that's in here is notice for the cell phone. All right. This is something that you're going to learn, but I didn't want to throw too much at you at once. Where it says pattern down there, that's called either a regex or a regular expression pattern. What it says in English is this. When you're putting in a person's cell phone number, you put in 3 digits, then you put in a hyphen, then you put in 3 more digits, then you put in another hyphen, then you put in 4 more digits. All right? If you want to start looking at this stuff, and maybe you have no desire right now, but if you do want to, you can Google HTML5 pattern. All right? And it brings up this site, html5pattern.com, and it's not totally complete, but it shows, if you want to put in zip codes, for example, how you can do them. It shows you how you set them up for different countries, and it even allows you to check them. So notice in here, it says try it out. So I want to put in a zip code, 55555. All right? And it says, that worked. Well, what if I only put in 4 5s? It didn't work. It tells you that it must use the requested format. So it has to be either 5 digits or 5 digits, a dash, and 4 digits. That will also work. All right? You're going to become masters of regular expression handling because you have to. It's used all over the place in IT. All right, so it's 9:02. Let's come back at 9:15. We're going to quickly go over the chapter because I've hit all the high points with you already.